Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 26th of March in London. I'm Caroline Hepke. Coming up today, exclusive reporting from Bloomberg uncovers evidence that Elon Musk's Starlink terminals are falling into the wrong hands. Traders bet that the Bank of England will start cutting interest rates before its peers as inflationary risks ease and Bailey goes dovish. Plus, Donald Trump's wealth has risen by $4 billion, and it happened on the same day his business empire was supposed to be in peril like never before. We have the details. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. A Bloomberg News investigation has uncovered multiple examples of Starlink terminals being traded and activated illegally in the likes of Russia, Yemen and Venezuela. Our exclusive reporting has found that these satellite links are being activated in territories where the US company has no agreement to operate. Bloomberg's senior editor Alan Crawford has been tracing the sales of Starlink terminals.
There are many countries around the world where there's no licensing agreement between the government and Starlink. And the trouble is that people are turning to the black market to obtain Starlink devices anyway.
The work of Alan Crawford and colleagues from across Bloomberg has raised questions about the company's control of a system with clear national security dimensions. SpaceX has not responded to Bloomberg's request for comment on the investigation. Now, traders are betting that the Bank of England could beat its European and US peers to interest rate cuts. Money markets have raised wagers on easing at its next monetary policy decision, putting the probability of a cut in the UK at 20%. Bloomberg's James Orcock has more.
Britain was supposed to be lagging behind in the rate-cutting race, but these words from Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey have made markets re-evaluate.
Yeah, we don't have to actually get inflation all the way back to target sustainably to cut rates, for instance, because what we have to do is be convinced that it is going to go there. You know, we should act ahead of time in that sense because we have to be forward-looking.
He also told the FT rate cuts were in play at future meetings. That shift in tone has markets repositioning. The odds of a quarter-point rate cut in May are now double that of the Fed or the ECB. It's a big shift, with the BOE having overtaken the other two during the course of this year. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
The US and UK are accusing state-backed Chinese hackers of cyberattacks spanning years and stealing the data of some 40 million British voters. American officials charged 7 Chinese nationals with attacks on politicians and companies that Washington and allies have linked to President Xi Jinping's government. Former UK National Security Advisor Mark Lyle Grant says that formally accusing China is an important step.
The fact they're now calling out China rather than saying we don't know where it's from or just raising it with the Chinese ambassador privately, I think is a sign of a greater willingness to use intelligence to prevent hostile activity against the UK.
Sir Mark Lyle Grant speaking there. Both the US and UK have announced sanctions against 2 Chinese individuals and a firm in Wuhan, China. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says that the attacks present an epoch-defining challenge. Boeing's CEO of 4 years, Dave Calhoun, is stepping down. According to those familiar with the matter, his departure was spurred by the CEO at the manufacturer's 3 largest US customers, pressuring board members to control its safety crisis. Bloomberg's Guy Johnson says Calhoun's successor will face a number of challenges.
The real question now is who could ultimately replace him. He will be there until the end of the year, in some ways as a lame duck CEO. The name that is being floated, Larry Culp from GE. But our understanding is that maybe Larry Culp doesn't want the job. Why would he want such a tricky job at such a tricky time, particularly after he has just fixed GE and put it back into a much better place?
That was Bloomberg anchor Guy Johnson. Boeing chairman Larry Kellner will not stand for re-election, and Stan Deal, who heads the company's commercial airplane division, is departing immediately. Now, Adam Newman has reportedly made an offer to buy the bankrupt company WeWork. More from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Newman is WeWork's former CEO. He's also a company co-founder. 5 years ago, Newman was ousted by the board, and he's been trying to regain control ever since. The Wall Street Journal says Newman recently submitted an offer to buy the company for more than $500 million. It wasn't immediately clear how Newman would finance the acquisition. The Journal says Newman's lawyer sent a letter to WeWork's advisors last month saying he was joining with Dan Loeb's hedge fund Third Point and other investors in exploring a bid. I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
Monday was also a big day for Donald Trump. His fortune hit a record $6.5 billion US, and a bond payment of more than $500 million was cut by more than half. The former president's social media company, Trump Media and Technology Group, wrapped up a 29-month-long merger process, so that increased Trump's net worth by more than $4 billion, adding Trump to the ranks of Bloomberg's Billionaires Index for the very first time. At the same time, a state appeals court gave him a lifeline. He was facing a deadline to post a bond of more than $500 million in a New York fraud lawsuit. The court slashed the sum to $175 million, an amount that Trump said he'll cover. The net result is that for the first time ever, Donald Trump has joined the ranks of the world's wealthiest 500 people on Bloomberg's Billionaires Index. So those are some of our top stories then for you this morning. Now, in a moment, we're going to bring you more on the misuse of Elon Musk's Starlink, delivering broadband internet to countries that have no agreement to operate it. But first, I saw this on the Bloomberg terminal, and of course, I'm always interested in property. Property in London may have become more affordable in the past 5 years, but homes in England are still eye-wateringly expensive if you compare them to earnings, which Bloomberg's Tom Rees and Andrew Atkinson have done for us. They've been looking at the ONS data. They have found that London homes still cost almost 12 times earnings. London may have been the worst performing region in England for house prices in 2023, but it still doesn't stop it being immensely difficult. Kensington and Chelsea in West London have the least affordable homes. The median price paid for a home in just that little neighbourhood, 34 times average annual earnings. So that story on London property on the Bloomberg terminal for you this morning. Now, let's get more on Bloomberg's exclusive reporting that smuggled kits from Elon Musk's Starlink are falling into the wrong hands. These satellite links are being activated in territories where the company has no agreement to operate, places like Russia, Yemen and Venezuela. It is the subject of today's Big Take. Joining me now to discuss it is our global business reporter, Bruce Einhorn. Bruce, good morning. I suppose the first question is, how are these unapproved groups and countries actually getting hold of these units?
Starlink has over about 5,500, I think even more, satellites circling the Earth. If you get a dish, which you can buy in some location where perhaps it is available, then you can get your dish back into your country where it's not authorized. You can access the signal. There are some countries in the world, the UK, other countries in Europe, the United States, Japan, where Starlink has a license, but there are many other places in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, Middle East, where the governments have not authorized this. So technically it is illegal to use Starlink in those places.
Yeah, okay. I mean, these countries, some of them at least, have in common the fact that they're at war. How big an issue is this whole idea of using these kits illegally, of smuggling these kits, and why do they want the units so much, these places?
Well, it is a very good system. So the appeal of Starlink is that you're independent of the cellular network, you're independent of the landline, you can access the internet via these low Earth orbit satellites and have high-speed access to the internet. And so it is something that appeals to people in all sorts of places, whether it's in a war zone, say in occupied Ukraine, where the Ukrainian government has said that Russians have been using it, something that Starlink says is not something they've authorized at all, or in other places like Yemen, like Sudan, where the infrastructure is just not very good. And so suddenly, if you've got a Starlink terminal, you're independent of that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're head and shoulders above everybody else. But surely they can be tracked. Can't they just be turned off remotely?
That is a question of just what is the ability of SpaceX to turn these off. And SpaceX has said that, for instance, if there's use by Russian forces, that is not something that they authorize. SpaceX has taken action in some cases. The question is just how much are they aware of what's going on, because it is something that keeping an eye on all the unauthorized use is a high task.
Yeah, absolutely. So then how are Starlink and Elon Musk responding? Have they responded to these findings, this report?
We are. They did respond in earlier this year when there were the reports out of Ukraine about Russian use. Elon Musk and SpaceX did comment then, saying that this is not something that they approve of. As far as use of it in places like Yemen, Sudan, or even in places like South Africa, Musk's birthplace, where the government has not authorized it, but yet there is a thriving black market. It's unclear what the company's position is on whether they're obliged to do anything more.
Yeah, absolutely. Bruce, thank you so much for being with us and for your reporting. Bruce Einhorn's piece, along with his colleagues, is on the Bloomberg terminal this morning. Elon Musk's Starlink terminals are falling into the wrong hands. The effectiveness as a communication tool makes the satellite internet service a target for a growing trade on the black market. Really fascinating. Bruce, thanks for being with us. And I know that you'll keep us up to date with any response that we do get, perhaps from Starlink or from Elon Musk or any of the others that we've reported about. Right, let's turn our attention then also to the UK, and traders betting on the Bank of England could be the first major central bank to cut interest rates this year. That's a big shift, isn't it, from only a few months ago when rates in the UK were expected to stay higher for longer than in the US and in Europe. Garfield Reynolds, our lead for our Asia Markets Live coverage, joins us now. Garfield, very good morning to you. Thanks for being on radio. Is this more to do then with the weakness of the UK economy than with the Bank of England managing to beat back inflation?
Well, I mean, there's a bit of both, and certainly one of the paths to taming inflation is to hurt the economy. That's, for example, the attitude taken by New Zealand's central bank governor, who's been quite happy to see a recession, well, at least willing to see a recession in order to try and tame inflation. So, the BOE is looking at the potential to cut rates sooner than a lot of people possibly, including inside the bank. After all, it was only the last meeting when we had a couple of the hawks stop voting for rate hikes. So it has been a rapid evolution. And that's because inflation in the UK has continued to slow down in a way that it hasn't quite done, especially in the US. So they don't face as many concerns about lingering inflation.
Yeah, although the Bank of England's been concerned about the second round effects, are these now being seen as less of an issue by traders? I mean, why are traders sort of shifting now?
Well, I think because one of the big things was the words we had from Governor Bailey earlier in the program when he was talking about how we don't need to get back to the target before we actually cut rates if we're confident we're going to get there. So that's more open to rate cuts than Chairman Powell has sounded, even than Christine Lagarde has sounded. And in particular, I was looking, Bloomberg Economics and others have been saying they expect the UK inflation rate to be back at or under the target by about June, and therefore that was when they were thinking that rate cuts would come. But if you say you think that inflation will be where it needs to be by June or roundabout, or maybe very early in the second half, and Governor Bailey is saying we could cut before we get there, well then that does bring in the odds for a May cut even, which would definitely be before anybody else looks likely moving.
Okay, speaking of which, I mean, the Fed, is June still the base case? I mean, Friday's going to be awkward. We get both the PCE, but also Jerome Powell is speaking on Friday, even though markets are closed.
Yeah, the markets being closed, could make for an exciting open to next week once we get going. But it's also, the data has been jumping around a bit, in the US, but the Fed has been emphasizing that they still see the path to softer inflation intact. And in particular, to some extent, I think they've proofed themselves perhaps against too much of a reaction by the latest dot plots. They stuck with 75 basis points for this year. They kept their inflation forecast reasonably contained, but they also lifted their growth forecasts. So they're kind of forecasting a Goldilocks outcome of okay inflation, okay growth, even if they cut interest rates 3 times this year. With that being the case, you need to see some pretty extraordinary, shifts in the data, and you need to see more than just 2 or 3 data points. You probably need to see 4 or 5. So with that, again, people are girding themselves for this could be a really rock markets. The Fed has done their absolute best to set things up so that markets cannot be rocked.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.